I'm John Sipher.
And I'm Jerry O'Shea.
Between us, we have over 60 years of experience as clandestine officers in the CIA, serving in high-risk areas all around the world.
Part of our job was creating conspiracies, like being undercover, to deceive our adversaries.
Now, we're going to use that experience to investigate the conspiracy theories everyone's talking about, as well as some you may not have heard.
Could these be true, or are we being manipulated?
Find out now on Mission Implausible. Right, today's guest is Ken Dilanian. He's the Justice and Intelligence Correspondent for NBC News. He's also worked at the Los Angeles Times, US Today, and other outlets. But probably more importantly, he was a standout football star for the Williams College Fs. And so, Ken, I've known you for a while, and I've known you as a reporter on the intelligence community, and I think you did a great job there. However, your timing on taking over the justice role is either really, really good or really, really bad.
Right.
I think we're seeing some of the biggest changes we've seen in decades at the Justice Department, if ever. We have actual conspiracy theorists at top roles at the FBI, Justice, and in the intelligence community. So just to start off, what's your take on that, on your new beat?
Yeah, well, first of all, John, I'm sure your listeners know that you were much more of a lacrosse star than I was a football star. So
yeah.
Let's clear that up right away.
Your Wikipedia page talks about your football skill. I don't have a Wikipedia page,
so
there you go.
But yeah, this is the theme that you mentioned of the two conspiracy theorists or prior conspiracy theorists running the FBI is a fascinating one and has been part of my daily life in covering these guys because, they made a lot of money actually fomenting baseless conspiracy theories about, in particular, the FBI. Now they're running the place. And what's been interesting to me is to see how they've navigated that, because they've got a following out there that's expecting people to be frog marched out of the FBI in handcuffs, right? And that's expecting answers on Jeffrey Epstein, and that's expecting, Dan Bongino's weird theory about the who planted the pipe bombs outside the RNC and DNC to come to fruition. And of course, none of that can happen. So they've sort of tried to straddle it. So, for example, I'm sure you saw they gave an interview to Maria Bartiromo on Fox News where they said flatly that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Dan Bongino said, "I've seen the file. He committed suicide." Kash Patel said the same thing. They got huge blowback for that. There's probably millions of Americans just do not believe that and now have turned against them. And they repeated it again yesterday in an interview with Bret Baier on Fox. But for other things, so they can't. I mean, what can they say about the Epstein case? Like, the evidence is in front of them, right? But for other things, they've sort of tried to play into their previous conspiracy theories. Like Kash Patel promised in this latest Fox interview that he is going to, show the public the real story of what FBI assets were doing in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Well, there's already been a thorough report by the Department of Justice Inspector General on this, which gave chapter and verse on what was true and what was false about that conspiracy theory. So I'm not sure what else is left to be revealed, but he left the impression that the public's going to know the real story, and conservative media plays right into that. It plays it up. The New York Post, the Daily Mail, Fox. So that's been really interesting to watch that dynamic.
So Ken, you were a football guy and John was a lacrosse guy. Let's go to baseball just for a second. If you're at bat, if you're successful 3% of the time, right?
No, 30%.
30% of the time, right? So what all right. I'm not a baseball guy either. All right, let's start.
Bad.
Let's go. That's if you're only if out of 62 at bats, you only get 2 hits, 2 singles that don't make any difference in the game, right? That's bad, right?
That's bad. Yeah.
So for Stop the Steal, the conspiracy theory, there were 62 court cases. They lost 60 of them. Most of them were just thrown out because there was no evidence. It was without merit. And the 2 where they prevailed were under minor conditions that really made no sense. And I wanted to ask you, just knowing the judiciary and the system and the very fact that you would bring 62 cases and have 60 losses and 2 really that don't really mean anything, is that part of the conspiracy to bring those cases? Or is that just like trying hard? Where's the line there?
That's a great question. I mean, look, and what's also interesting is you don't hear much about that anymore, right? Like they have power now. So there was some talk about, well, we're going to re-examine the 2020 election, and there is a weaponization task force. Let's not forget that is supposedly looking at a lot of different things, but you don't hear much about that because there isn't the evidence out there. My take on why they brought so many cases is there was a demand. Trump kept saying, find the evidence. And people like Rudy Giuliani were trying to satisfy him. And so they just went into court with whatever they had, and it wasn't much. And the other interesting thing about that whole episode, right, was that, one of the main parts of the effort of Trump to baselessly say there was fraud was he wanted the Justice Department to tell the country that there was fraud. And he demanded really of his senior Justice Department officials to do that. And they all said no, and they threatened to resign. These were his political appointees, and they were unsung heroes of the moment because they had sent out a letter to the public, which is what Trump wanted them to do, saying, we found fraud, we need to investigate this. That would have changed the whole equation, and they didn't. And none of those people are working in the Trump Justice Department in the second term. There aren't people like that there now. There are people who I think would do whatever he wanted, would say yes to that request now. And that's pretty scary.
It is scary. I mean, so Jerry and I have been out of, government service for a while now, and I'm always careful to, not try to talk to people who are inside and find out what's happening, but that's your job. And so, I've now been reading about what Doge has been doing and some of the stories about what's happening in the intelligence community, in the Justice Department, and the FBI in particular. And again, they have these conspiracy theorists leading them. What's it like inside these places, the extent that you're getting reporting on that? Are people leaving? Are people just keeping their heads down? What are you learning about that?
John, yeah, people are leaving, and it's been a real earthquake. It's hard to sort of convey how unprecedented, that word gets used all the time, how different this is than any other administration in modern history, and how we didn't really see this coming. Remember, people used to talk about Schedule F. Donald Trump was going to implement Schedule F to get rid of the civil servants. It turns out he didn't need to do that because he was willing to fire people in what many experts say is legally questionable ways. He was willing to reassign civil servants in ways that they probably could challenge. But it turns out it's pretty expensive to hire a lawyer and go to the Merit Systems Protection Board, and then you're still out of a job anyway, and you don't have income for 2 years. So people aren't doing that. So what he's found is that what they have found is that they've been able to remove most of the top officials at the Justice Department, many of the top officials at the FBI, and targeted ways. Like they fired all the prosecutors, or most of the prosecutors who worked for the special counsel Jack Smith case. These were career prosecutors who had done yeoman's work for the government, many of them national security experts. They've removed, for example, many of the top officials in the National Security Division of the Justice Department, a lot of the institutional memory. And they did it by transferring them to like things that had nothing to do with their legal expertise, like the Sanctuary City Task Force or some program to train judges overseas. And after a while, these people said, I can go earn a good living in the private sector. I'm not putting up with this anymore. And that expertise, by the way, that's not easily rebuilt. You guys know this because you work in government. That's going to take a decade to replenish. It's not just going to be like, a new president in 4 years, we can hire all these people back. They're gone. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, more than half the lawyers, more than half, maybe 60, 70% have left because it's being run by a person who's just turned civil rights enforcement on its head. And, in the FBI, initially there was a plan, we think there was a plan to fire a mass amount of people who had worked on January 6th. It was interesting. The people that they brought in to be the acting director, a man named Brian Driscoll and a guy named Rob Cassane, they stood up and they said no to that. And I think they were successful. They staved that off. But nonetheless, they removed basically all the top layer of management, the assistant directors. There have been firings and removals of several special agents in charge. Some we know about, others we don't know. I'm trying to confirm. So what the message that is sent is you toe the line or you're out. And so, in the first term, we saw bureaucracies sort of acting more normally and resisting things that they thought were illegal. And it was a different group of people anyway. The political appointees we're not asking them to do these kinds of extreme things. Now we're seeing, political appointees turning agencies, the missions on their head, and civil servants feeling compelled to go along, or they know they're going to lose their job. And it's you guys know that this is not normal for government. This just doesn't happen. This Trump administration's very different from the first one.
And just to add to that, like, as you know, Ken and Jerry, is the FBI and the CIA and the State Department, in many ways, they're like what people probably know better as the military. Like, you don't become an Army general or a Marine general or an admiral by just signing up. And when you're in your mid-20s, they make it. It takes years and years of experience. It takes a long time to create that expertise, that knowledge, that wide ability to lead, that knowledge of these complicated and complex systems takes years. That's why all the admirals and generals are in their 50s, right? It's not just and so you lose those people. It isn't as if you just can turn the keys over, or when you leave, if new people come in, you're losing that expertise. It takes years
I know
to grow.
Most of your listeners know this, you guys know this, but just to explain and make it very clear, we're talking about people who are not political appointees. They are civil servants. They've served Republicans, they've served Democrats. They were in the first Trump administration. They didn't like everything they were asked to do, but they did it. Some of them were appointed in the first Trump administration. The head of the Public Integrity Unit, which is, by the way, has been disbanded, we can talk about that, at the Justice Department, was a Republican Trump appointee. So, but yet those people, anybody who is deemed to have done things that the Trump folks didn't like in the Biden administration, they're out. And again, they're supposed to be protected by civil service rules. The idea behind civil service is that you're insulated from politics and from political demands, but that system has come under real strain in this administration.
Yeah. So Ken, I think one of the things that is really different and is also scary and touches on conspiracy is now the relationship between the DOJ and the White House, right? There was always a wall between them, and there needed to be, because the DOJ and the FBI needed to be apolitical. And that's not really the case anymore. So what are your concerns about the White House just telling, and the Justice Department being okay with, investigating and bringing cases against political opponents for political reasons, and B, what happens when they start to go to court? Or people are pressured to plead guilty, and you won't have to go through the process is often the most painful thing, right? You got to get lawyers, you could lose, but if you plead guilty, which is what they want. And so what's your sort of sense on where we are now and where you see us going, maybe?
Yeah, Jerry, you're putting your finger on another unprecedented, I hate to use that word, but it's an earthquake of a development, really. For the first time in the post-Watergate era, we have a Justice Department that has thrown out the idea of being independent and of not having contacts with the White House on individual criminal cases. And and instead they're completely in lockstep with the Justice Department. With the White House and the president. You've got an attorney general. We've all seen her on Fox. She says openly she's a friend and ally of the president. She's there to carry out the president's policies. In the last administration, Merrick Garland, by the end, he didn't even want to be in the same room with Joe Biden. He was investigating his son. There was no love lost between that White House and that Justice Department. And Garland took pains to be independent. It is completely the opposite here. There is, for decades, there's been a White House contacts policy that restricts who at the White House can talk to certain people at the Justice Department about criminal investigations. We don't know exactly what happened with that policy, but we don't believe that it's being followed. And again, we don't have the details because it's hard to penetrate the Trump, inner workings about who exactly is Stephen Miller talking to the Attorney General, which levers are being pulled. But we know very clearly that, for example, Donald Trump signed an executive order in the Oval Office, essentially ordering, they called it a review, not an investigation, a review, probably the lawyers use that word, of Chris Krebs, the former head of the cybersecurity agency. And then lo and behold, a few weeks later, we reported that he's under criminal investigation. And that is chilling. I mean, that is the idea that a president can essentially direct a criminal investigation of a political opponent.
Well, and
And
he
yeah,
was appointed by Trump the first time, just to be
exactly,
clear.
exactly. And why Trump doesn't like the fact that he said the 2020 election was free and fair and free from fraud. But to your point earlier, Jerry, I mean, what are the consequences of this? Because there still is a court system, and you still need a jury verdict to convict somebody. So that is really hard to do. But as you mentioned, just being under federal criminal investigation is expensive. It causes anguish. It causes problems for people. It's something that nobody wants to do. I mean, Chris Krebs had to leave his company, and despite him leaving the company, members of that company still lost their security clearances. They're in the cybersecurity business. They need those, So these are the kind of things that are happening. I mean, this White House has shown no compunction about going after its enemies, using whatever power it can, removing security clearances. We can talk about what's been happening with the law firms. We've never seen this before.
You media are the ones that are supposed to protect us, so keep do what you can there. But to go to a little bit of conspiracy thing recently, I don't know if you saw this report about Fort Knox.
Yes.
So Fort Knox, supposedly where the gold is, the government controls it. There's like any government facility, there's regular reviews, there's people there, there's security. Donald Trump has kept up this thing that, maybe the gold is not there. Well, then it turns out his son runs a company that benefits by this. He's spread the word that maybe the gold is not safe and maybe it's not there, which raises the price of gold, which helps his son specifically with his gold company and these type of things. And then people around him, Elon Musk and others, they amplify this and they create this fake story completely out of whole cloth that, oh my God, maybe the gold's not safe, which of course is silly. He's the president of the United States. He could get the answer in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And in fact, those of us who've worked in the government, you don't need even try to get the answer because of course it's safe. That's what, there's a whole institution behind that. So these kind of things, the corruption piece of this, I mean, what are you seeing on that side of it too? Like, I mean, we've seen the thing about the airplane. We've seen the thing about Fort Knox. We've seen the thing about the crypto companies and people getting tours of the White House and all this kind of stuff. What
so first, before the corruption, just the point about Fort Knox, the idea that millions of people believe this stuff is disturbing in and of itself, right? Like this thing that's self-evident to you and me. Of course, the goal, and even Chuck Grassley, a Republican senator, Trump ally, I remember said right away, I was in Fort Knox a few years ago. I saw the gold; it's there, but that didn't stop people from believing it. So that's that. But in terms of the corruption, look, this is not what I report on a daily basis, but I've been watching it, and I read a great piece by Peter Baker in the New York Times that really laid out how this is a thing that we have never seen before in the modern history of the presidency. I mean, look, we all, historians have now shown that LBJ was pretty corrupt. He had the TV stations, Nixon did what Nixon did, but this is massive. And, first of all, Donald Trump was in the first term, he was the first president in the modern era who didn't, put his holdings in a blind trust and disassociate himself from his businesses. But it was the things that we were worried about in the first term, like which foreign governments were buying hotel rooms at the Trump Hotel, are quaint in comparison with what we're seeing now. As you mentioned, the dinner where people paid millions of dollars to essentially dine with Trump, the deals that his son and son-in-law are making, the crypto, the meme coin. I mean, it's unbelievable that the family are able to enrich themselves this way as they're deregulating crypto and taking actions that, fuel crypto boom. And
the tariffs, like this whole thing, I'm going to put these big tariffs on, but if you come to me personally, if you're Apple and you come to me personally and say, okay, I'll give you a break, but you got to do things for me. Like, I mean, it's just old fashioned corruption like Jerry and I saw overseas for many years.
It seems that way, and even as this is going on, Donald Trump and his aides have dismantled all the mechanisms that would check that corruption, whether it's firing the inspector generals or doing away with the public integrity section of the Justice Department. And not that, and by the way, I'm not sure that any of those entities could have dealt with a president who is doing these things in the wake of a Supreme Court decision that said the president's immune from prosecution. So I don't know if any of this would have helped, but at least it might have exposed more some of this stuff you might have had if you had an independent FBI and they saw this. they might investigate, and at least start an investigation. But we have none of that, and so there's the stuff we know about, and then there's the stuff we don't know about, of course.
Yeah. So Ken, John and I and you, we all have something in common. We are all enemies of the state. Now, back when we were in CIA, the state we were enemies of was like Russia, North Korea, Iran, right? And now you've got the current White House calling members of the media enemies of the state. So how we got around it is, we found people who were in those states who couldn't stand the corruption and the hypocrisy, and they wanted to get the word out. So they would come to us as agents often, right? They would volunteer, and then we would handle them securely to make sure that the information got to where it was, the truth. So now, as sort of an enemy of the state, said tongue in cheek, and I think you're a representative of democracy, what is your relationship to the Justice Department folks? And are you still able to get people to talk to you offline and tell you the truth? I mean, because there's a lot of fear about being hunted down and fired. I guess what I want to hear is, I want you to assure us and listeners that, you can keep people safe and they can find ways to talk to you to talk about the truth of what's going on.
It's a great question, Jerry, and the answer is absolutely yes. In an atmosphere like this, people want to talk more than ever. People who had never talked before are talking now. My relationship with the Justice Department, frankly, is cordial with the Public Affairs Department, the Pam Bondi appointees. They're perfectly nice people, and we have a working relationship, and I, of course, give them a chance. If there's a critical story, I give them a chance to comment. I tell them what we're about to report, and I take their point of view, into account. But thankfully, there are people inside both the FBI and the DOJ and other places that are willing to take risks and to tell us things that they're not telling us classified things, by the way. They're not going to violate the law to do this, but that's okay. We don't need to know that. They're telling us what's happening, what moves are being made policy-wise, what personnel, who's getting fired, just the basic workings of these organizations.
Corruption.
And frankly, the FBI leadership has been very annoyed by some stories, including one I did about Dan Bongino, having a large security detail, and has started, leak hunts, leak investigations, and they've been polygraphing people inside the FBI. And you guys know the implications of that.
Polygraphs, they don't really work, right? They only tell whether you're nervous. They can't tell whether you're lying.
And if you want loyalty, if you start polygraphing people, there goes that.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Exactly. If you were trying to recruit people at a foreign government agency, you would just be thrilled to hear that the bosses are polygraphing people and viewing them with suspicion, right? So but the answer is yes. Because the vast majority of people inside these institutions are not happy with things that are happening. It's not that they're against everything Donald Trump wants to do. They may, for example, be perfectly happy with, cracking down on immigration, or whatever, but they see a corrosion of the rule of law, particularly the way the FBI and the DOJ have been treated, and they're acting accordingly.
Ken, what's your take on this big story? Obviously, the Jake Tapper book that came out, and he's making the rounds about the Biden health story. What's your take on that?
So I didn't report on the White House, and I wasn't, on the front lines of that.
Based on your experience in Washington.
Yeah, look, I think Jake Tapper has said, and others have said that, look, the media has some answering to do about that, about why we missed what was obviously, evidence of cognitive decline, and why we allowed, or didn't make a bigger fuss about the fact that the president wasn't doing interviews. We, of course, reported on that and took note of it. And then my personal experience with this story was when Rob Hur, issued the special counsel report and talked about well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. I reported on that, and the pushback from the White House was intense. And then when I actually was the first to write the story, that remember when Joe Biden, right after that, complained that Rob Hur brought up his dead son, and how dare he, what is this guy doing bringing up my dead son? And I immediately was able to figure out that that's not what happened. Actually, Joe Biden brought up his dead son. And even though they knew the transcript eventually would be out, White House officials just simply lied about that. And I use that word not. It's not an insignificant word to use, and they just were not on the level, and they pushed back. They just wanted to win the day, win the news cycle, even knowing that they would be exposed later. And then recently, when the audio of that interview came out, it was even worse, right? Like, so yeah, there was I don't know if, I mean, different authors have had different takes on this. Chris Whipple wrote a book, and his conclusion was it wasn't a cover up, it was willful blindness. He had good days and bad days, and people around him really believed he was effective to function. I think Jake Tapper's book leans more into some people covered some stuff up. I don't know what the ultimate answer is there, but clearly now people are coming to grips with the fact that had Biden gotten out, and he served one term as he said he was going to do at one point, and there was a normal primary, maybe the world would be much different today.
Yeah. So in CIA, we serve abroad for tours, like for 3 years or something. And oftentimes we'll only get back home for like one time. So on Biden, when I would come home and see my dad, and I wouldn't see him for like 18 months, and I'm like, whoa, he's changed. He's gotten a little slower. But my brothers and sisters who saw him every day, they're like, no, he hasn't really changed, just because they've seen him every day for 18 months, and I show up 18 months later and I have a completely different view on things. So, there's with Biden, you could, there's this so slow slide into getting older, right? I mean, but I want to get into something I hate, whataboutism. So Memorial Day, John and I, we have, friends and allies who were killed fighting for this country and being involved in, including our assets. And yet the president comes on and says, happy Memorial Day to all, including, just the first sentence here, including the scum that spent the last 4 years trying to destroy our country through warped radical left minds who allowed 21 million people to illegally enter our country, many of them being criminals and mentally insane, through an open border that only competent president would approve, and through judges, blah, 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 blah. This is just like one friggin' sentence. Yeah. That's not, I don't have to see him like once every 18. That's not rational. That's like, so I'm fine with, they hit it, Biden was in slow decline. What do you say about when it's like a pie in the face, right in front of us? This is not rational stuff.
Well, two things. One, yeah, that message just made me sad. Did we just lose Jerry?
That's good. It's better without him. Go.
That message made me, that just makes you sad. Like, that's what the world is seeing from the president of the United States. And there's been 100 of those, right? So, but I think what people would say about it is that the thing about Trump is that he's always been that way. He hasn't changed. It's not like he's declined. He was elected after saying things like that, right? After saying things that would have disqualified anyone else. So whether you think, you may think he has cognitive issues, but that's Donald Trump. That's what he's been since he's stepped on the political stage. And so, and the voters, or a certain segment of the voters, are okay with that.
I think, the fact that Donald Trump is beyond the pale, and he says these awful things. He calls judges monsters, all these kind of things. It does make it easier for the people who are supporters of Joe Biden to say, he would have been much better. He was more effective at the job. And I believe that's true. He had talented people around him. He was more effective at the job. But those of us who've taken history and political science courses in the lead up to our president jobs understand that one of the key jobs, maybe the key job of a president, is to communicate, to explain to the people what he's doing, why they're doing it,
exactly.
So that the polity understands what he's doing and why. And I think that's where he really fell down. I don't think, as we led up to this election, if the economy was doing well, and if he did have policies that were helping the average worker, and in red states and these other places, they did a really poor job of communicating to the public what was going on. So I really hold them, responsible for their failure, or his failure, to communicate effectively, and the people around him to get him to communicate effectively. And if he couldn't, to then perhaps call it out. And so, when presidents make mistakes, I think Afghanistan was a debacle, and I think his ability to communicate was horrible. I still think he's a million times better than Trump, but nonetheless, if we're going to be honest brokers here, we have to explain, where we think people are going wrong, and you in the media have to do that too, even though you get attacked from both sides.
I agree. And, the polls show that the public was way ahead of us, the media or whoever, the elites. They thought he was too old from jump. I mean, 70% at one point. And so I don't know why more people didn't listen to that, but that signal was certainly there.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go into the intel field, and so you've got you have a long history of of following national security. Now, have you seen since WMD in Iraq? Have you seen anything at all like what happened with the assessment over Venezuela, where the intelligence community comes out and says that there is no or almost no evidence of control by the Venezuelan government of these criminal gangs, and it's not an invasion. And then you've got the number two with the DNI saying basically, change this. The president doesn't like this. This is politicization we haven't seen since the Iraq War. And of course, that didn't go real well for us when that got politicized. So what's your sense on that?
This is more blatant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. And I think it speaks really, it was comforting, and it speaks well for the intelligence community that they didn't change a thing, right? Like they didn't buckle under that pressure. They've learned their lesson
But they got fired.
Yeah, that's true. And so what will happen the next time? That's a fair point. But the analysts who produced the underlying work presumably didn't get fired. You can't fire them all. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm not covering the intelligence community as intensely right now, but I'm told that it's less, there's been less of that, the kind of purges that we're seeing at FBI and DOJ. It's harder to do that at the CIA and DNI. We'll see. I mean, it's
right.
It's just very scary.
So Ken, it's just us. We're sitting around having a beer, just you, the three of us, and all our millions of listeners. So let's just bullshitting. I wish there was millions, but was this a conspiracy? I mean, did Joe Kent is it like they just kind of know the White House wouldn't like it? Or are they, not writing anything down? Are they like getting on a phone call and saying, is it, somebody, Stephen Miller saying, kill this. This is a conspiracy. I want you to do this. And Joe Kent was just the one sort of like caught writing the note. Or is this, do they sort of know in advance, how much of a conspiracy is this? Or do they just sort of know, right?
I mean, I don't know the
facts
in this case.
Right.
Again, but I just remember in the first term, it was well known that you don't bring up Russia or things related to Russia in intel briefings, because then the boss would go in a bad direction, and and there was that kind of, so there are a lot of things around Trump that people around him just know that this is what he wants. This is the smart thing to do. So it would not surprise me at all if it was not overt, but it was just like some him or someone else taking the initiative and saying, let's take another look at that. Because this is very inconvenient for our policy justification here.
Yeah. So one thing you are having to sort of work on a lot now as you look at Justice Department is the issue of immigration. Yeah. What are you learning? And now, I do think it's true that the beginning of the beginning of the Biden administration, he did send signals that brought a lot of immigrants to our shores, illegal immigrants. But I also see these stories that, in the last year, there's probably more illegal immigrants that were pushed out by the Biden administration than there have been by the Trump administration, despite all the stories and the sort of cruelty we see. What's the truth there? What are you learning about the whole issue of border protection and immigration and illegal immigration?
Yeah, again, I'm not the expert on this. Someone else covers this for us, but I watch it closely, and I think the story of the Biden administration was, as you said, wide open doors in the beginning. Then they realized this is a problem. They started slowly, closing the doors, and by the end, there was very little movement. But they didn't tell that story effectively. Again, going back to communication, in part because some of their base, it was not a good story that for some of their base, they didn't agree with that policy. But they certainly weren't able to communicate to the public that, hey, by the way, we've shut the door. This is not the first 2 years. But Trump has done things. Trump has taken it much further, obviously, and border crossings are almost non-existent now. But it was interesting. I actually I had to do some live shots today on this immigration issue, because there were some people removed from their jobs inside of ICE, because the White House is frustrated with the pace of deportations. And it turns out it's hard to deport people. Like the promise of mass deportations, that's really hard to do. So like if there are 10 million undocumented immigrants in this country. I think the Trump administration said in April they had removed 140,000. That's a drop in the bucket, right? Last fall, there were documents that showed there were 400,000 undocumented immigrants with criminal convictions, including 29,000 felony convictions. Most of those people are still here because they're hard to find. It's manpower intensive. You have to have a strike force. You have to have armed people to go out, especially and that's why they've ordered the FBI to spend like 30% of their time working on immigration matters, which is very frustrating for a lot of FBI people I talk to, and it's probably taking resources away from counterterrorism and counterespionage because they can't deliver on their promise to deport all these people unless the only way really they could do it is to start having mass workplace raids, really just showing up and vacuuming people up, and that would cause a lot of problems for the economy. It would cause maybe people, the general public would not be appreciative of that. So they have a real conundrum here.
But we know about police when they do traffic stops. If they have a quota, then they just sit out and arrest everybody. So I can imagine it's much easier to go and just get people out of job sites than it is to go find these hardened criminals.
But yeah, or they could go door to door, and that evokes Nazi Germany. I mean, they could certainly try to do that if that's, but I don't think the public's going to support that, even though the public largely seems to support the idea that there's too many undocumented immigrants were let in, and then some of them need to go out.
Yeah, well, they're also made afraid. I mean, if you look at Fox News, every second or third day, there's some horrific crime that an undocumented or illegal immigrant is posed. But they're not really going after all the immigrants. My understanding is a lot of it's discretionary. So, like farms out in like North Dakota, where 80% of the workforce are ill-paid undocumented workers. But they need those because the farmers are Republican and they vote that way. Like they're going after them in places like cities, but they're not going after the agriculture industry because that's goring their own ox. But so Ken, I get off my soapbox. I did want to ask you though about the Supreme Court, right? So we've got this court now, and surprisingly, Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh are surprising a lot of people. And this is the last bastion. And as case after case ends up in the Supreme Court, sort of what's your sense on, the court's makeup and, where its limits are and how it can be pressured? If anything, that's the last barrier, right? And what happens if and when it comes to Trump defying the Supreme Court? Sort of what's your sense on that? And this is going to be the huge, if not the biggest story potentially of the next couple of years of the Trump administration.
Yeah, it will. And again, I'm no Supreme Court expert. I probably can give you the conventional wisdom on this, which is, as you said, it's pretty clear that Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh on a lot of these issues are not sympathetic to what the Trump administration is trying to do. And so a lot of people think there'll be a lot of 7-2 cases. I mean, what we're seeing in the lower courts is that the Trump administration is getting its clock cleaned on everything from Harvard to the law firms to immigration cases. I mean, it's starting, the losses are really starting to add up, including most recently the tariffs, although that was just, as we went on the air here, that was just stayed. But it seems like that was just a sort of procedural thing, allowing the administration to answer. I mean, and the administration's answer to that is this is a judicial coup. These horrible judges are standing in the way of democracy, which is really scary rhetoric, and raises questions about at what point will they try to defy a court order. But so far, the courts are sort of the main bulwark against a lot of the things that the Trump administration has tried to do that many people think is illegal and unconstitutional. And it remains to be seen how many of these they're going to win in the Supreme Court. But what we've seen so far is that, again, 7-2 seems like a smart bet on a lot of this stuff.
But even when he had trials where there was a jury that found him guilty, he still says those are illegal and against him, and he's created a lot of followers who actually still believe that stuff. So it's it's going to be interesting to see how he responds to that if the Supreme Court goes that way. But let me go back to something I do know you did a lot of work on. You spent a number of years, obviously, reporting on the intelligence community and CIA. I want to just your experience from that. What do you take away from what you learned about the intelligence community? And you can give us some good stuff and some bad stuff, or if you don't have any good stuff, just the bad stuff.
No, it's both. Of course, it's both. Like what I learned, it was fascinating. and the CIA, you come into this fresh, having read all the books and watched the movies, and there's a mystique about the CIA, and the CIA did incredible things, and particularly after 9/11. So that was fascinating to meet people like you, John, and Mark Polymeropoulos, and you, Jerry. I mean, just like
we're just so handsome. It's incredible. I know, charming.
The intelligence community is full of quiet heroes, and the stuff, and I've been really fast and privileged to meet people and hear their stories. And then on the other side, you realize in some ways the CIA is also another government bureaucracy like the agriculture department. And you have people who complain about the pace of things and write books about how they weren't able to do the intelligence, the collection that they wanted to do when they were a knock in Europe or whatever. Or for example, I did a story many years ago about when I actually, under the Freedom of Information Act, I got a bunch of Inspector General reports that talked about the management culture of the CIA being bad, and there wasn't training for managers, and people were elevated who had no business being managers, and then, a survey actually that showed that a lot of people were leaving because of bad management. And I heard that story over and over again. People saying, "This is a great place, but like, it's I can't advance here. Or I feel that, my manager is terrible, so I'm leaving." So yeah, I saw the bad and the good. And then of course there was the post 9/11 debate about the interrogation issues and the black sites and stuff. And it was so interesting to cover the evolution of that, which it's amazing that it's still being litigated in the Guantanamo cases. But yeah, fascinating stuff.
It's amazing how much a bad manager can like set back people and projects and operations for, a good manager, like you see with a good teacher can make someone move up several class levels, and a good teacher, and a bad teacher can do just the opposite.
And I felt like I learned the CIA is a lot like journalism, where they just elevate people to be managers without training them or with any regard to whether they're actually going to be good managers. Oh, you succeeded as a reporter, so now we're going to make you an editor. You succeeded as a case officer, so now we're going to put you in charge of these people. That doesn't always work, right?
That's right.
It doesn't. But there's also, and far be it for me to like completely defend it, there's the pressure. So, between tours, we get home leave. It's like, it can be 6 weeks, and we almost never take it. We always show up and it's like, oh, you got 6 weeks, but if you want this job, you got to be there in 2 weeks, right? And unlike the military, we're not very big. So the military is like, okay, we're going to train 30%. We're going to be prepared 30%, and we're going to be involved 30%. And in CIA, you're either you're in or you're out, right? And
like a senior military officer, by the time you're a general, has often been to like Princeton for 2 years and a special training center. Also, like they don't like we're always sort of do business at the front, and if you're not, like you're sort of out of mind. Like they don't send us off to all those schools. No. A little bit,
teeny bit, but it's always.
I remember talking to HR for that story, and there were a lot of promises to change that, but I suspect it hasn't really changed that much, right?
It's the same with the process of bringing in new hires. Like when we came in 40 something years ago now, like they were like, we're working on speeding this up and the whole process. And then like every new person that would come in every 2 years to run the recruitment center is like, we're going to fix this. And instead of it taking 2 years, we're going to make it. And then, and I've heard that same speech over and over and over, decade after decade. And maybe it's better, but I'm skeptical.
Well, let me ask you this though. What's your take on how are millennials, because I haven't really covered the CIA closely for a number of years now. How are the younger generation integrating themselves into that bureaucratic structure? Are they thriving? Are they changing the place?
Jerry, you go first.
I
don't know.
Sort of, I think two things. One is when we went in, I think you saw it as a calling, right? It's like you're a policeman or a priest, or, it's like, it's something you do your whole life. And I think younger people, which is natural, like I'll come in and do this for 2 or 3 years and then get out. And, I don't think we thought that way, but to be a good case officer, you can't do it in 3 years. I mean, it takes 10 to 12 years sometimes until you really, understand enough to be able to run a small station or something like that. And the other thing is, whereas John and I sort of came from the Stone Age. I mean, we actually entered the agency before they had computers. They were just phasing out electric typewriters. But today, separating anybody under the age of 30 from their telephone is almost impossible. And yet it's a death threat for us because it records where you are, what you do, who you talked with. And so how you socialize and how you interact with the world without one of those devices is really difficult for people under 30, but pretty easy for John and I. Over to you, John. Yeah.
Talking to sort of older guys, when we were still in and they'd left, they were like, "Oh, it's not the same as it was." And I'm like, "Oh my God, we're doing amazing things." So I always said to myself, when I leave, I'm not going to be that way, talking about how bad it is now and how they don't do it. And so I'm sure there's still, incredible work being done here. But the one bitch I do hear when I talk to people who are still in, sort of senior people running management overseas, is like, to get people to go out and do the work overseas is hard. Like, they all want to be on the computer or on their phone. It's like, you need to go out and actually meet physical people. And they're like,
can I send an email?
Yeah, no, exactly.
But I will say, I do want to throw in, and I want to steal from John. So I was in Iraq, for example, and I got to tell you, the young people who were there, they were committed, idealistic. Often, if not the majority of them, were giving up jobs. They came out of great schools with great prospects. They gave up jobs where they could be earning 2 or 3 times as much, right, to serve in Baghdad and take huge risks and be away from their family. And I got to say, I think every generation of CIA officers, not all, but probably the majority, really go in because they want to serve and they believe in what they're doing. And they understand the agency has issues, warts and all, and part agriculture department. But at the end of the day, they really want to be part of something that they hope is mostly a force for good, right? And I think that's still the same today.
Although, Jerry, just to make it clear how old you are, that was like 20 years ago. So.
For the record,
when I came
in journalism before the computer age too. Well, before the internet.
That's right.
There was computers.
When I came in, we were still fighting the Spanish-American War, right? We're gonna. That's right.
Well, because you're on TV, they probably have like special like creams and crap that they put
100%
to keep you looking younger. Like, we're starting to fall apart. My whole body's falling apart, but they keep you guys going. Do they give you money for your like fancy clothes and stuff too?
No, not anymore. That's a thing of the past.
Oh, dang it. That's right. We never got Austin Martins, so it's like.
So does NBC, so ABC and CBS look like they're giving in to the man on these cases, and that the Trump administration is pressuring them on things? What's NBC got coming up? You don't want to answer that.
I don't know of any. I don't know of any mergers or anything where they. I mean, look, the government has power over all these big companies, right? That's always a concern. But honestly,
they're not supposed to use that power. But yeah,
exactly. The thing that I've noticed in the Trump era is just a greater concern from our lawyers about, for example, the idea of is this going to be the first administration to prosecute a journalist under the Espionage Act? Because as you guys know, that's always been out there. It's a threat. The law is written as such, it's illegal to publish classified information. And the Bush administration, they considered it and they said, we're not doing this. That's a worry. And so that's something new that, you didn't worry about that in previous administrations. There's guidelines, for example, about subpoenaing journalist records, and Merrick Garland basically said, we're not doing that. And they just, Pam Bondi repealed those guidelines. So those are the things.
I worry. I think that's a real threat. I think they're going to do. I think they believe that a lot of the public doesn't follow or understand these things, and if they're told that the media is doing something wrong, a large enough portion of the population will believe that, and they'll get away with stuff. Now, how far? I don't know, but
yeah. So Ken, you asked us a CIA question. I want to ask you a mainstream media question. Of course, that's a plural. It's a spectrum. What's a journalist these days? Is a podcaster a journalist? Is Tim Pool a journalist? So, is it arguably Snowden, right? He goes online. Yeah. Is he a journalist? I mean, you obviously are, but what's a journalist now in this day and age?
That's an old question. This dilemma's been with us for a long time, but you're right. It's really pronounced and more exacerbated in the age of the podcaster and Substack. And look, my kids, I don't think my kids could answer what a journalist is. They're getting bombarded with information. They don't know the source of it. The videos on TikTok, who made that? Is that person credible? Look, all I can say is, like, the journalism that I practice, before we say something, before we report something, it goes through layers of vetting. Not just editors and senior executives, but then we have a standards department.
Right.
Because back in 1996, there was a scandal where Dateline put a bomb on a gas tank because they were trying to show that the gas tank blew up, and they gave it a little help. The president of NBC lost their job. So ever since, there's been a very robust standards operation. Lawyers look at it, and that's true of most mainstream news organizations, and it's not true of Joe Rogan, right? It's not true of some people on Substack.
We don't do it on this podcast either, to be clear. We just say whatever the hell we want, right?
But you self-censor because you're not going to slander someone.
Right.
Like there's certain things you wouldn't say.
So we might not be able to be the new director of FBI in the Trump administration. Sad that, Jerry.
Right. But that's not really a satisfactory answer, right? But that is one way to separate what is a traditional journalist from this new kind of thing. Is like how is the information vetted? What's the reporting process?
Right.
It's a go ahead, Jerry, if you have a question.
No. So every administration can be, some of its character can be judged by like the jokes they tell about it. So I don't know if you've heard any good Trump 2.0 jokes or anything, but I've been looking. I haven't seen many good ones. But it was like, how do you get Trump to change a light bulb?
How?
Tell him Joe Biden put it in. I don't have a whole lot more. I was wondering if you got at least one good joke out of this administration yet.
No, but I am seeing that this taco thing. If he's following.
Oh yes, that's the first one. That's true. Yeah. That is true.
And he is apparently very angry. And I saw somebody on X saying, I wish no one had told him about that, which is a reasonable thing to say because it may cause him to double down on some tariff that's unwise now, just to show Wall Street that he is not going to chicken out.
You want to quick explain taco? I love this.
Trump always chickens out. This is the Wall Street. This is the traders are saying this, that they don't have to worry about a tariff staying in place because in really almost every case he has, imposed a big tariff and then rolled it back.
Well, I apologize for Jerry's stupid joke, but I do want to thank you. I don't want to keep you too long. You have actual real work to do.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't anymore. And you have important work to do. And we want to thank you for what you're doing. I think you've done an excellent job. We hope you keep it up. It's a tough time to be a journalist, and I think you do a good job. So thank you so much for spending time
Very
with
much
us.
so. Yeah.
And it's been my privilege, John and Jared. Thanks so much.